I'm recording my homily for the 5th Sunday of Lent. You remember when the movie The Passion came out? So that was the Mel Gibson version of Jesus' last days here on earth. And you remember when you went to see it? So I remember when I went to see it, and there was a gentleman who was sitting like a row right in front of me, and he was doing what everybody does in the movie theater. He had a big, giant bucket of popcorn, right? And so he's eating away. But as the movie unfolds, you could tell just by his demeanor and by the fact that he was stopping eating his popcorn, especially in the scenes where it became much more graphic. And then you just had this overwhelming sense that the movie theater was actually in some ways the wrong place to be experiencing what we were seeing. Now, yes, it was a movie, it wasn't reality, but still you had a sense of the reality of the events of Jesus' passion. And you realize in those really serious moments where you're entering the life of Jesus that that's not the time to be celebrating, to be having a party, or even just to be sitting there eating a bucket of popcorn, right? There was just something different about it. And so we realize that in the seriousness of Christ's life, there are times when we just stop doing anything else and focus on that, right? I think we can relate to that with the whole virus thing. It's like everything else gets put on the hold. It's like the whole world is getting put on hold while we deal with this. Okay. Jesus in the desert. He says, I'm putting everything else on hold so that I can fast, so I can enter into the seriousness of this event, of what's happening, what's transpiring, right? And so for us to be able to do that too. That's why I think in some ways this Eucharistic fast that we have, this inability of us to receive the Eucharist, in some ways is appropriate. It's like we're entering into the fullness and the reality of this sacrifice, okay? The last week was very frustrating for me because I had a lot of things I was supposed to be doing and I didn't really do any of them. It was like a week of grief for me. Now, you remember the 5 stages of grief, right? I think I run the whole gamut on them, but maybe you can relate to 1 or 2 of them given what we're going through, right? The first stage of grief is denial, right? I remember when I first heard that the Archbishop said that we were no longer going to have public masses. I was like, can he do that? Is that possible? It was just complete denial. It's like, that can't be right? That's not even possible. I couldn't accept it. And you can imagine in a person in that mode, they're not going to be very functional. They're not going to be able to do anything positive as long as they're in denial. Okay? I think some people are in denial of the impact that the coronavirus is having on us. Right? The second stage of grief is anger. I encountered a lot of that in various avenues, in various ways, and for my own self, there's times where I get angry with this. It's like, why can't we just get back to normal? Why can't we just get everything back in routine, right? Well, you can't. You can't control it that way. The third stage of grief is bargaining. And I've had people do this, and it's good. The parishioners want to receive Jesus, but there's like this bargaining. It's like, Father, can we show up to the Mass, when you're recording it? Or can we do this, or can we do that? There's like this bargaining, but it's also a form of, I can't accept it. I can't accept this moment, right? Because it's hard. We don't want to accept it. Then the last stage of grief is depression. And that's where I was at last week. I was just in a funk. It's like I couldn't do anything. I checked the news 500 times. It's like, why am I doing this? I don't know why I'm doing this, but then I would do it again, check the news. So, 5 stages of grief. The last stage is acceptance. Now, what do you think happens when somebody accepts their current circumstances? They are now free, right? They're now free to act. So, for example, the first 4 stages, they're all focused on the self. The last stage, acceptance, says, okay, I can accept it, now I can get to work. Now I can roll up my sleeves, now I can help. You can imagine everyone working in the hospitals has gone through this probably at some level. And when they reach that moment of acceptance, then they can roll up their sleeves and say, okay, let's get it done. Let's get to work, right? And so I think that's where Jesus wants us to be. Because when we enter into his life, we generally just don't do it immediately. But there's stages. There's stages of how hard it's going to be. And because of that, denial or depression or anger or bargaining with Jesus, saying, Jesus, there's got to be an easier way than this, right? There's not. I think these are also stages of allowing Jesus to be in control rather than myself in control, and then accepting that, and then acting on that. And when you get that point, it's so freeing. So just even today for me, a little victory is I actually recorded, I'm in the process of processing it, but recorded classes for confirmation and RCIA, which I should have done that 2 weeks ago. But those darn stages of grief, right? I shouldn't be blaming. It was my fault. I'm just a slacker. Okay, so finally, we're getting to work, right? Getting back to work and developing this new routine based on reality. And so Jesus wants us to be able to be there, to be at that point in our faith life. You know what I'm describing? The resurrection, right? The resurrection is like, okay, new life rises to the surface. So we all have these moments of resurrection. In the book in the Old Testament of Zechariah, okay, he was a prophet, right? Chapter 14, there's something very interesting. Chapter 14 of Zechariah, it describes in a prophetic way the Mount of Olives, right? So imagine for a moment you're on this mountain. Now, I suppose the way I have the camera angled, you can feel like you're looking up on a mountain, right? Okay, so up on a mountain, and on the other side of the valley is the Temple Mount, which back during Jesus' time would have been impressive across the Kidron Valley, right? But you're on the Mount of Olives, and this is where Jesus would go to pray and to be quiet and be with his disciples, place to think, right? On this mountain, in the prophecy of Zechariah, one day God would stand on this mountain, and to the north and to the south, the mountain would split apart. And from the mountain would come all those who have died. Resurrection. Now, if you ever go to the Holy Land and you go to the Mount of Olives, the Jewish people have taken it literally, and the entire mountain now is a cemetery, because everybody wants to be there. So when God splits the mountain apart and all the dead rise, they get to be there, right? Makes sense. You know what else is on this mountain? Bethany. The town that's mentioned in the gospel today, this is where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus live. So if you go up to the very top of the mountain, on one side you have the olive gardens, you know, with the trees, the orchards with olive trees, right? The Mount of Olives. But right on the backside of that mountain is Bethany. And Jesus goes up on this mountain to encounter this family. Now, what's happened? Lazarus has died, right? Now, Jesus was a long ways off when he got word that Lazarus was ill. But he didn't rush. And you remember why he said he didn't rush there? He said, so that God can be glorified, so that the glory of God can be revealed. That should sound familiar, because last week in the gospel, when he heals the man, it was a blind man, right? My brain just went blank. Yeah. When he heals a blind man, And in the process of doing that, they're asking him, so whose sin was this? And he says, there was nobody's sin here. This was so that the glory of God can be revealed. And so Jesus goes up to this mountain where this is a prophecy, right? Where the resurrection is going to happen. And he brings Lazarus back to life on that mountaintop so that the glory of God can be revealed. So when you have those moments in your life, when you come back to life, you've accepted your circumstances, you've rolled up your sleeves and you say, all right, Jesus, I'm ready to work. You've come back to life so that the glory of God can be revealed. So that you can bring God's glory into the world. You can bring his joy and his trust and his love and his hope and his courage and generosity and kindness and his grace. You can bring it into the world, right? The model, this is the model. This is the model of how God's glory comes into the world. Yes, we go through those difficulties, those stages of grief, those stages of inability to work, but then we accept it and we get to work, right? So Mary and Martha today are beautiful examples of that in the gospel. They come running to Jesus, right? So they've had their stages of grief and they're still kind of working through it, right? If we're really honest. But they come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, right? If you had been here. He says, no. Let's get to work. Let's not raise your brother. Let's manifest the glory of God through your brother. And so he does it so that all can believe. You know that moment he has where he's in prayer just before he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead? And he says, Father, I do this not because of us, but I do this so that your glory can be revealed to everybody. It's a powerful moment. This is one of the last things Jesus does before he himself is killed and then rises from the dead. So, put this in context as we get ready for the Triduum, as we get ready for Holy Week, which we're going to begin next week with Palm Sunday. But just to be taking this into your own life, if you're struggling, if you're kind of going through a depression, we're there, right? We understand that. That's kind of like Lent. But then there's this moment where Jesus says, okay, now come. Let's rise. Let's roll up our sleeves and let's bring the gospel. All right. God bless you all. Take care. I'm recording my homily for I already forgot. Yeah, 5th Sunday. Okay, starting over.